This week, I will be presenting on universal design for learning. Before I do, though, I am taking a detour into women's issues. The men in the course may wish to look away, though I think the women in the course will be interested in this. A male gynecologist in the 1940s collected data from 15,000 women. The data he collected were various measurements such as arm length, head size, waist, and so on. 9 separate physical measurements were recorded for these women. After analyzing all that data, what did he discover? There you have it. The dimensions of the average woman. Based on these dimensions, this statue was sculpted. Norma resides in a museum in Cleveland, Ohio. It was created as a model for all women. Can you believe it? There was actually a statue made for men too, but we're not going there today. I'm sticking to the topic of women. In 1945, a contest was set up inviting American women to submit their measurements, those same 9 dimensions gathered on the earlier study. The sponsors wanted to determine who was most like statue Norma. I can't understand why women would participate in such a thing. Well, it was 1945. Women were obsessing about having perfect bodies then. Maybe that is still true today. $3,864 women participated in the contest. And what they found was that fewer than 40 had the average dimensions on 5 out of the 9 dimensions. Not even one woman came close to the average on all 9 dimensions. So there is no such thing as the average-sized woman, just like there is no such thing as the average-sized pilot. Plane engineers got the message. Since there is no such thing as an average-sized pilot, the design of pilot seats needed to be adjustable to accommodate different sizes. While that was understood, we still had male researchers seeking to define the average size for women. And if you don't fit within the average, you're considered unhealthy or out of shape. Another example of the deficit perspective. Back in the day, phys ed teachers would use this statue as a model of the ideal shape for what girls' bodies should look like. Normal, whatever number we attach to it, qualifies who is valued and not valued in society. If your number is outside the range of normal, then you are less valued. Notions of normalcy determine who belongs, who is welcomed, who gets access to privileges. It's predetermined. There is also no such thing as the average student. We all have various abilities when it comes to memory, language, knowledge, reading, vocabulary, curiosity, perception, cognition, interest. Not one yellow data point lands on the average. Today, we don't rely on the concept of average much anymore. Just as there isn't one size for pilots, there aren't one size students or one way to learn. The reality is that our individual skills and talents vary greatly throughout our lives. We have this questionnaire on eClass. You can print it off and do it for yourself. No doubt your results would be different from mine. No two individuals will experience, learn, or respond to the world around them in the same way. We are uniquely individual in more than just our fingerprints. We are uniquely individual in our cognitive processing, our physical talents, and in many other aspects. In brain research, our responses to the same stimuli are as unique as our personal fingerprints. How does this all apply to the field of education? Well, curriculum and grades are designed for the mythical average student, even though we know no such student exists. We can correct the curriculum. Let's look at how. First, we design the material based on student diversity. If engineers can design adjustable equipment, then teachers can design adjustable curriculums. This quote that classrooms are the cockpits of the economy refers to the fact that what happens in the classroom leads to what happens in the economy. Classrooms are powerful. What happens in the classroom affects world structures and many different organizations. If we can get it right in the classroom by meeting the educational needs of all the diverse learners, the impact is seen not just in the economy, but globally. Let's look more closely at what we mean by student diversity. Students come to the classroom with different ways of knowing. Their background knowledge and lived experiences will all be different. They will be different in their preferred ways of learning, be it auditory, visual, tactile, physical, kinesthetic, and so on. Of course, their personal interests and motivations will be different. Some may be more drawn to math, others performing arts or fine arts. Each will be different. Their levels of engagement will vary. Some may be able to concentrate deeply, others much less so. Inclusion is not just about people with disabilities. It is not just for people with learning difficulties. So who is it for? It's for everyone. Inclusion is an attitude and approach that embraces diversity and learner differences. Inclusive education promotes equal opportunities for all learners in Alberta. But I hope in other provinces too. I am still in Saskatchewan. Inclusive education hinges on belonging. For the student to feel connected to the teacher and the teacher to the student. Let's explore the features of the pilot's adjustable chair. It can tilt at different angles. It can move forward, backward, higher or lower. The armrests can move up, down, in, out. Do the adjustable factors built into the design meet the size and shape of all the possible pilots? We're not designing for the average. We're designing for a range. To continue the metaphor, what kinds of planes are the pilots flying? Big jumbo jets? Small puddle jumpers? How is the plane responsive to the pilot's dimensions? Are there incongruencies? Finally, how do the pilots make the adjustments needed to fly the plane? Which levers or buttons make the necessary adjustments to the seat so they can settle comfortably and take off? They need to have control. We can apply this metaphor to our teaching. It's up to teachers to design and create an environment where students can make adjustments for their learning, in addition to the teacher's decisions around adjustments. It's complicated. You first start by getting to know your students, while keeping in mind all their differences. Long gone are the days when students were expected to sit quietly and do as they were told in school. Today's teacher really gets to know their students. What's going on in their lives? We get to know their needs, their skills, and their interests. There's lots to learn about each one. We need to discover the range of diversity in our students. I'll share an example from my own experience. When I first started teaching deaf and hard of hearing students, most of the students I had were hard of hearing. They didn't know sign language and did not want to learn sign language. They had zero interest in deaf culture or sign language. They just wanted to be hearing. I remembered me at that stage. Their backgrounds were similar to mine. They just wanted to focus on passing as hearing. Well, I couldn't force them to learn about deaf culture. I couldn't coerce them to learn sign language. But the problem was, I couldn't understand them. Even though they could speak, I couldn't speech read them. Hard of hearing speech is different from a hearing person's speech. That's why I never wanted to be involved in associations or organizations of hard of hearing people. That's why I never hung out with other hard of hearing people, because I find it so hard to understand them compared to hearing people. So how, as the teacher, was I going to meet their communication needs? We got an interpreter for the class. The interpreter would sign for me what they were saying, since I couldn't understand any other way. So the program focused on them as hard of hearing students. They didn't want to be seen as deaf. They were shy or embarrassed to be identified as deaf. I had to respect that. The range of diversity in the class was pretty narrow. All the students identified as white. There were a few students who had Indigenous heritage, but their parents refused to acknowledge this. The students told me some of their family history, background, and stories, but their parents had been made to feel ashamed of this heritage. Diversity was not valued at that time. So, as I said, that particular class was not very diverse. Because these students had some hearing, their understanding of English was pretty good. I had to figure out how to meet their needs to get them through high school. Most of them read at a grade 4 or 5 level, so we had to get them up to grade level in reading and writing. High school textbooks were too advanced, so that's one area in which I had to make adjustments. I had to adjust the curriculum and the learning goals to meet the learning needs of the students. It was a challenge. Our priority is to adjust the learning environment to be responsive to the students' needs, skills, and interests. I realized that my hard of hearing students thought like deaf people, not like hearing people, but they didn't realize that. So I tore apart the curriculum to adjust to fit the learning and cognitive processing and thinking of a deaf brain. Deaf people process things visually. So that's how I structured the teaching and learning. I started to teach the deaf way, but they didn't know that. And it worked. The students flourished. I took the time to analyze what adjustments would be needed to meet the needs of a visual learner, irrespective of the fact they personally did not want to learn about deaf culture or sign language. Their learning needs were visual. They had to speech read a lot. I used visual cues everywhere. Our environment was full of them. I made sure all my instruction and lessons fit with their needs as visual learners. We have to support the student to take the initiative to make adjustments themselves for their own learning. Give them the tools they need. In my case, I looked for tools they could use to help them organize their writing. I looked for tools to support their reading. One of my students struggled to read because the text on the page would float around. She hadn't been coded with any official learning disability, but she told me what was going on. It made it hard to focus on reading. So I did my own research. I did find some tools to aid in her reading. We need to have a portfolio of strategies to support student success, especially as it applies to curriculum goals. We've talked about this shift in thinking, the old deficit model. The problem was with the student. That thinking is shifting. The problem is ours. The shift has moved toward meeting the individual's needs. In my time, all energy and focus was on remediation. We want the disability to just fade away, make it invisible, drag the child up to the standards of normal. They need to be like their peers. This could come about with accommodations and modifications, anything that could be done to approach the normalcy of peers. That didn't work. The problem is with the learning environment, not the student with the disability. It's the learning environment. That's precisely where the problem lies. We tried to fix the curriculum, fix the lessons, and fix the strategies to meet the needs of the students, but we completely overlooked the learning environment. We need to create flexible learning environments that can adapt to the needs of students, of all students. We need to correct the environment. We need to create a learning environment where all participants are welcoming and accepting of diversity and inclusion. That's how we create a sense of unity. We are all different and we all belong. In the old way, unity came with sameness. We coerce students to function in the same way in order to belong. Now our thinking has shifted, and we want to value difference and meet students' needs in a welcoming environment where they can be themselves, where they feel connected and a sense of belonging. Let's use a bowling metaphor this time. In order to knock down the most pins with one shot, aim for the pins that are hardest to hit. The green zone is the pin that will knock down most of the others. Which pin is hardest to hit in inclusive education? How can we connect to the most pins? Let's look at the response to intervention pyramid. Most school divisions in Canada follow this model. Between 80 to 85% of students with learning challenges benefit from these supports using universal design for learning because it is effective and efficient and has the greatest impact. It's where we can address the most needs. For those students who struggle, then more targeted supports are provided. Between 5 to 15% of students fall within this yellow zone. Supports or services might include a special education teacher, a speech-language pathologist, or even a school psychologist. The top red zone is the smallest group of students at 1 to 7%. These students benefit from more intensive, highly individualized supports and services. The goal is never to move children from green to yellow to red. Our goal is to keep the children within the green zone as much as possible. To keep them in the green zone, teachers have to be proactive. You have to predict the needs and necessary adaptations, prepare for them in order to implement them. This is where universal design for learning comes into play. UDL focuses on the environment, curriculum, and expected diversity. You know you will have diverse needs in your classroom. Is the range narrow or wide? UDL involves eliminating or reducing barriers to achieving learning goals. Some goals may not be applicable to a student and are otherwise a barrier that you may have to overcome. UDL involves eliminating or reducing barriers in teaching methods. Are you the kind of teacher that loves to talk? That may not be what some students need. How will you adjust? UDL involves eliminating or reducing barriers in learning and teaching materials. Are your materials text heavy? That could be overwhelming or daunting for some students. How will you adjust? UDL involves eliminating or reducing barriers in learning assessments. Maybe students can't perform well in a certain assessment format. How will you adjust to meet their needs? The key ideas are, as the learning designer, you must create multiple and flexible forms of representation of the information, the learning material. You must create multiple and flexible means to demonstrate understanding of the information. How many different ways can students express their learning? As the learning designer, you must create multiple and flexible strategies and activities to encourage the students' engagement in the learning. That's universal design for learning. That's how we serve the 80 to 85% of students on the response to intervention model. Some students' needs cannot be met strictly within the universal design approach and need more targeted supports. Remember, this is a small number of students. For them, we have a responsive approach. It goes beyond universal design to address their unique needs. In this case, instruction is more targeted to the individual learner's characteristics. Instruction is flexible and dynamic and may be carried out in groupings based on their readiness, interests, and learning profile. Practically speaking, their challenges. Instruction incorporates flexible material, methods, content, products, and processes. Consider products. If it is impossible for a student to write, how can they create other products to express themselves and their learning? In terms of processes, instead of verbal presentations, maybe games would be a better fit, or drama and skits. Different alternatives should be attempted. This is what we refer to as differentiated instruction. We're not going to go into that this week. We will explore that in more detail next week. For students whose learning needs cannot be addressed by universal design, the green zone, nor responsive instruction, the yellow zone, the next level on the pyramid is specialized instruction, the red zone. It's even more individualized. For these students, we create IEPs, individual education plans. Teachers are responsible for writing these plans, often touching on reading, writing, behavior, social skills, maybe even life skills, or even self-control. and so on. For students in this category, governments require IEPs to be created. The Ministry of Education approves the plans. Plans are developed in consultation with parents and any others involved in the teaching team. The teacher is responsible to see that every specialized support or service outlined in the IEP are secured. Examples could include a speech-language pathologist, an occupational therapist, a school psychologist, or other counseling services, to name a few. Any such specialized supports or services are all geared towards student success in participating in school, academically, socially, and physically. Typically, a student will start in a universal learning environment, the green zone. UDL is an educational framework based on principles of maximizing learning opportunities for all. This is where we can achieve the greatest impact. This is the pin we are aiming at with our bowling ball. Let's see those pins knocked down. Universal design initially started in architecture, addressing barriers in the built environment. We could see the barriers created in the built environment for some people with disabilities. Some of the most obvious barriers were steps, curbs, elevator buttons without braille. The original concept of universal design began with addressing the barriers to participation in the built environment. Let's look at the concept of retrofitting, which refers generally to upgrading or improving existing structures or adding technology to older systems. Currently, it seems our efforts are focused on redesigning and renovating existing buildings to be more accessible. This approach has some disadvantages. Often, the retrofit resolves accessibility needs for a certain group of users. It rarely addresses the accessibility needs of all potential users. Let's look at an educational example of retrofit. The slide presentations in this section of the course does not look anything like the slide presentation in the other section of this course. Why are they so different? Because I am deaf. I can imagine a deaf student taking this class online, trying to read the text-heavy, sometimes pretty small print of the original slide, while at the same time trying to follow the interpreters because, of course, the instructor is speaking the whole time the slides are on screen. Who knows how large the image of the interpreter is on the screen? And is the interpreter popping around on the screen to different positions as often happens online? Sometimes slides may have multiple images or other visually distracting features. It's visually overwhelming. So my redesign is an attempt to show you how to fit the learning needs of all students. Historically, the learning needs of deaf students have been ignored. The assumption is that they learn like hearing students. They think that a visual learner is the same as an auditory learner, which is not the case. So I am trying to show you an alternative design. But what does that mean for me? It's taken me hours and hours to retrofit the content of this course, to recreate the slides and reduce them to key phrases, to carefully choose images to go with the slides, to pre-record my lectures. It is consuming immense time and energy. We are paying for the time of others to help with this process. So retrofitting can be very costly. Curriculums used today describe learning outcomes, course objectives, activities, lesson plans, materials, and so on. But for who? For the one-size-fits-all teaching approach, otherwise called equal instruction, meant for teachers who just want to follow a recipe. Now we're trying to retrofit curriculums. We're trying to figure out how to modify the curriculum to accommodate our students. Universal design for learning anticipates learner variability and can often address needs of all learners with disabilities. You plan with learner variability and diversity in mind. You identify and undertake to remove barriers based on student needs. You are able to predict the barriers to student learning needs that may present themselves and are proactive about addressing and removing them. UDL does meet the needs of the greatest number of students. UDL principles reduce the need for time-consuming adaptations of curriculum, materials, and resources. UDL reduces and may eliminate the need for retrofitting, so you can save a lot of time and work for yourselves. The key to effective universal design in learning is to be proactive. Design using these principles from the beginning. Avoid add-ons later. Endeavor for access for everyone, not just some. Addressing learning needs for persons with disabilities, clearing that path will help everyone.